Not for almost 40 years has there been such a split in British politics as 7 Labour MPs walked out of the party they once loved over Jeremy Corbyn, Brexit, anti-Semitism and what they call the machine politics of the hard left. So can a new political movement fly? Who would vote for it? Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Well, quite a day.
Quite a day, and it's ended in an extraordinary way with a meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party tonight, at which, when John Cryer, the chairman of the PLP, got up and started talking about the 7 MPs who've now left the Labour Party, there was applause from the room, quite a lot of it. And that applause wasn't necessarily signalling that they're about to join the gang of 7, but it was signalling enormous discontent with Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership and the way it has responded to all of this.
They were applauding the 7.
They were applauding the 7 in there. And there were emotional moments in there when one Labour MP, Ruth Smith, got up and talked about the disappointment of losing old friends, and she got quite emotional. People who were in there, eyewitnesses, said that she seemed to be in tears. The whole mood in the room was, I think, quite a surprise to some people who went into there. I think one of the other surprises, perhaps to some people, but not if you know some of the mechanics that have been worked on this whole project, is how you haven't heard at all from the big beasts of Labour. An awful lot of attempts have been made to call up some of the big beasts of the past, the years in government, and none of them are chipping in at the moment, and that's because they've been told to button it and not necessarily spoil a project that's meant to look like new politics.
Right, but I mean, are there more in the pipeline? I mean, a really intriguing video message from Tom Watson, the Deputy Leader.
Yes, talking to backbenchers generally during the day, you got an extraordinary amount of what you got in the meeting of MPs tonight, a lot of them having real sympathy for these 7. And Tom Watson, Deputy Leader, put out his own online statement in which he said to the leadership, you've got to change course or there will be quite a few more of these. I should just say, very quick, in parenthesis as it were, we mustn't lose sight of the Conservatives in all of this. They're hoping to get some Conservative people joining their gang, the 7, and today, this afternoon, the Prime Minister has had 4 cabinet ministers walk into her office, followed by 5 ministers, all of them saying to her, and some of them representing an even bigger alliance of ministers, that she's got to push back the date of Brexit. So real tensions there that could play into the fortunes of the group of 7 in, as you say, another extraordinary day in Westminster. It was only a couple of minutes after they'd pressed send on an email to the Labour Party, resigning their memberships. No wonder one of the former Labour MPs hadn't quite adjusted.
My name is Luciana Berger, and I am the Labour and... I am the Member of Parliament for Liverpool Wavertree. This morning, we have all now resigned from the Labour Party. This has been a very difficult, painful, but necessary decision.
For now, this is not a new political party with a logo and party colours. Its leading figures coyly suggested that's where they hope the story ends.
So we invite you to leave your parties and help us forge a new consensus on a way forward for Britain. If you're sick and tired of politics as usual, well, guess what? So are we.
Of course, we're hoping to recruit people from other parties, because one of the things I particularly feel strongly about is you will see over Brexit that the party system has actually broken down.
The MPs said Jeremy Corbyn led a party that had become sickeningly institutionally racist, with a culture of bullying, bigotry and intimidation.
And goodbye.
The leadership said the 7 MPs must now resign their seats and stand in by-elections to test their mandates.
The honourable thing, the usual thing for them to do now is to stand down and fight by-elections back in their constituencies.
So they would be dishonourable if they didn't do that?
I think it's the usual and honourable thing to do.
Leadership allies gnashed their teeth. Young Labour tweeted, "Cowards flinch and traitors sneer." Squawkbox, a pro-Corbyn news site, said the 7 MPs showed vacuity and hypocrisy.
Live both within and beyond our
Jeremy Corbyn's
Labour
deputy
base.
struck a very different note, suggesting in an online message the leadership response was completely inadequate.
I confess I feared this day would come, and I fear now that unless we change, we may see more days like this. The departure of our colleague poses a test for our party. Do we respond with simple condemnation, or do we try and reach out beyond our comfort zone and prevent others from following.
When we've got our Deputy Leader Tom Watson saying today that he now no longer recognises the Labour Party sometimes, then it shows that what the people who've left today have said, that some of those criticisms are much more widely shared than just among 7 people.
And I can tell you from the people that I speak to in my own constituency, they're desperate to find a home for their politics.
Why weren't you on that stage today? You sound like you're 1 foot there.
Well, I think it's important for the Labour Party to be able to have the opportunity to change their ways and to do what they think is right for the country. The challenge has been laid down.
How long's he got, Jeremy Corbyn, to change his ways?
Well, we've got 27th of February meaningful votes next week. We come out of the European Union in less than 1,000 hours. I think it's now time for the leader of the Labour Party to pivot to the conference motion, which was unanimously passed, which is a people's vote with the option to remain. He must do that, and he must do it soon.
And if he doesn't, there'll be a whole load of people following the ones today.
Well, it certainly would probably be more likely, wouldn't it?
Signs of more Labour MPs waiting in the wings, but not yet of Tories. Why aren't you launching a centre party today? Is it because you haven't had any Tories turn up yet?
I think that what we want to do is sit as a group of independent MPs and make the appeal to the people, as Chuka did earlier, to give people out there the chance to tell us what they want to see in a new, sensible, centre-ground political movement.
Nearly 4 decades after another set of Labour figures posed in London's East End to start their journey out of the Labour Party and into the SDP, there were echoes and warnings from history.
Limehouse Declaration marks a liberation for millions of voters in this country, disenfranchised in the past.
As someone who was in the SDP, what do you think is the lesson learnt from that?
Well, I think there are a lot of lessons, but one of them is that if the break is simply a split in the Labour Party, that's important, but that doesn't create a new politics with the common values amongst liberal, outward-looking people. Which
you need some Tories and you need others.
I think there has to be. I'm sure there will be a split in the Tory party in due course because you've got people cohabiting who have nothing in common. But that's something we need to see.
The Gang of 7 are not household names like some in the Gang of 4 in the 1980s. They'll be hoping the turmoil of Brexit might make party structures more fragile than they proved to be decades ago.
Well, with me now are 2 of the breakaway MPs, Luciana Berger and Chuka Umunna. So we know what you're against, but what are you for? What would you do that a Labour government wouldn't?
Well, we've been very clear today. We've set out the values that bind us together as a group of 7, that are the values that led many of us to join the Labour Party in the first place. And it's clear that the party no longer espouses. I've set out those values
like
today. Equality for all, opportunity for all, anti-racism, against all, social justice. And we see...
I mean, Labour would say, of course, those are Labour ideals. You would have said that a week ago.
Well, it's very, very clear, as we've set out on very many fronts, where the party has departed from that, where we're seeing across all parties a gravity towards the extremes, towards the fringes, which don't no longer reflect what the wishes of my own constituents and the wishes of the country.
Chuka Umunna, do you have a second tranche? Is there another group lined up? Do you have any Tories lined up?
Well, it's not about lining up any group of people. This has been a very, very difficult decision for us. It's been made by reference to our values, which are shaped by who we are, where we're from. There are clearly a large number of discontented people, both in our old party, the Labour Party, and the Conservative Party.
Did you know they'd applauded you in the PLP just now?
Well, I have to say, I mean, we were quite surprised by that because, of course, you know, for tribal reasons, of course, people will take against some of the things that we, you know, have said today. But, you asked what are the differences? I would say there are 3 big policy areas that have partly driven the decision. One is Brexit. You know, we are overwhelmingly anti-Brexit.
So you are an anti-Brexit party or grouping?
We think this is a disaster, and we wanted a much stronger, coherent opposition to the Conservative Party's Brexit. That was number 1. I think number 2 is the overall foreign policy position. We saw it on Scripple, we see it in relation to the lukewarm attitude of the leadership to NATO. And then thirdly, more broadly, making promises that can't necessarily be delivered. But the big thing, aside from the policies, was the culture.
What do you mean promises that can't be delivered then first?
Well, making large promises that
On
you can't
nationalisation
necessarily...
and things like that.
On various different things. But above all, look, we didn't join a political party to be abused, to have to spend hours and days organising against other party members. You join a political party to change the world. And the problem was that so much of the rancour was becoming a distraction, and that's why we've chosen to go independent.
I mean, 7 MPs can't change the world, can they? I mean, we have an electoral system that is stacked against you if you do become a new political party, which I assume you will.
Well, we have to stand up for what we believe in, and we've taken what has been a very painful decision, but to do and to make that step today. You've reflected on what's happened in the Parliamentary Labour Party. I know from the very many messages, private messages of support that I've received
So there
from
are
colleagues.
more.
Well, there's certainly
Chuka didn't
colleagues.
answer that question. Are there more of you?
We can't speak on behalf of those colleagues. Everyone has to arrive at a decision in their own time when they see fit. It's clear that there's a lot of discontent that is reflected in the reports that we've heard back from the PLP this evening. We've taken that stand. It's for others to make the decision to do so in their own time.
Who's behind you? Who's backing you? Who's funding you?
We are nothing. We're not a party.
Well, you've got a website. I mean, somebody must be putting some money into something.
We've financially backed ourselves.
Have you got any financial backers?
Well, we've actually been moved by the fact that, as I understand it today, we've had hundreds of people very, very kindly make donations on our website today.
Well, you know, the suspicion is that there are a load of old New Labour, Blairite businessmen who are funding their own centre party.
It's day one.
This
is day one. We're not a party. So first of all, we're not a party. Second of all, we reach out to the country to say if you want to get involved, please do join us. There's a website that we are, the independent.group. We've been buoyed by as I understand it, and I can only reflect on my inbox, the thousands of messages that we have received today. I was even an MP, and neither was Chuka when the times that you refer to. We are of a different generation. We're in 2019. The country faces very, very significant challenges at this moment. And it is on that basis that we've made the decision that we have today. And we invite people to join us in the country, and we invite people within the Houses of Commons behind us to join us too.
The thing is, Christian, we've got this place, right, is operating like it's the 20th century. And we actually need to update our politics so it's fit for the 21st century. And the problem is, if you look at the established parties, they're not fit for purpose. They are unstable coalitions which have fractured. They're not doing their job competently. And a lot of people out there are simply voting for parties to stop the other lot getting in, or because they see it as the least worst option. And we're saying, look, surely we can do better than this in this country.
But isn't this 20th century politics? This is the SDP all over again, in that you will split the progressive vote in marginal seats and let Tory MPs win.
No, look, this is a totally different century.
Will you stand a candidate against Amber Rudd?
Well, let's see. You know, we're not a party.
If you have a backer there.
We will all make decisions at the appropriate moment when there is a general election. The decision we've taken today is to leave the Labour Party. That is the first step. We've become an independent group of MPs. We are not a party at this moment in time, but we want to listen to the country, to hear what they've got to say in response. And it's clear from just in the past few hours that we've had a very significant response.
What is the difference between a group and a party?
Well, it's the first stage, isn't it?
Because we're an independent group.
Because you're just 7 people.
Look, the traditional way things are done here, right? Someone gets up a podium and committee room and tells everyone how it's going to be. We're clear that we think there needs to be an alternative. People need a better choice than they've got at the moment. But everybody's got to be involved in that conversation. So, look, I'm not going to deny. Some people might say, yes, have a new party. That might be the best way.
Will you have one leader?
We are a totally flat structure. We're going to we're looking forward to our inaugural meeting.
We just said we're going to do things differently.
But Chris, you are presenting the questions.
I know they're 20th century questions, aren't they?
You're presenting it in the context.
7 leaders, maybe.
No, in the context of the status quo. And we've taken the decision today that the status quo isn't good enough.
But you've got to work in the system we have.
But we said it's not good enough. And actually our constituents deserve better than this, and the country deserves better than this. And we want to stand up, and we've come together to work constructively in the national interest, because we could just put our heads in the sand, pretend like that there isn't a problem, and just continue, as things are. But we don't think that's right. And we put ourselves forward for public office, and with that comes responsibility. And that's why I've certainly made that decision today.
Well, it's the beginning of a long conversation and several interviews, I think. But Luciana Berger, Chuka, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Indeed. Well, with me now is the Labour frontbencher, Richard Burgos.
Hi, Christian.
It's a disaster for you, isn't it?
Well, it's a sad day. I'm sorry to see these colleagues leave the Labour Party. I think it's a mistake, and it's nothing that should be celebrated at all.
Well, it's been celebrated by your own members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, apparently. They were applauding the 7 who left.
Well, I don't think they should be applauding people for leaving. They weren't.
Well, they did.
They weren't applauding the people who... Obviously,
who were they applauding?
For example, Luciana has done great work as a Labour MP in putting forward the case for better mental health provision, including in prisons, which is of great interest to me as the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice. But actually, when I watched the press conference today, it didn't seem to me, when you look at the coalition that Chucker's trying to assemble with Liberal Democrats and Conservatives, it didn't really feel like new, refreshing politics. And I just urge everyone to think, whatever you do, don't do anything which makes it more likely that a Conservative government stays in power. Because at my advice sessions at weekends, as people coming to me about universal credit, about the bedroom tax, people going to food banks, and anything, and history shows us any split only makes the Conservatives staying in power more likely.
Your Deputy Leader Tom Watson said he saw this coming. Did you?
Well, it didn't surprise me because it's been trailed for a long time as a possibility.
But he saw it coming because of the behaviour in the Labour Party. He says the Labour Party is sometimes a place he doesn't recognise. Is that the same for you?
I think that there has been unacceptable behaviour by a minority of Labour Party members. Of course, we must make mention of the issue of anti-Semitism. One anti-Semite in the Labour Party is more than there should be, and robust, ruthless action is required.
So are you going to change?
Well, I think,
that's what Tom Watson was saying today, wasn't he? That unless the leadership changes, there will be more days like this and more Labour MPs will go.
What I would say, the kind of change that was being talked about in the press conference today by this new organisation that Chucker's put together, if we're talking about a new foreign policy, because that was mentioned...
No, I'm talking about changing the Labour Party.
Oh,
That's what Tom Watson was talking about.
Of course.
Is the leadership going to change its style in order to stop more MPs leaving?
But of course, in the press conference today, it was set out the things they think the Labour Party needs to change. Mike Gape said the Labour Party needs to change its foreign policy. He still celebrates the Iraq War. He still cozies up, unfortunately, to the Saudi Arabian royal family with all their human rights abuses. Chris Leslie is still deeply uncomfortable with Labour being an anti-austerity party. So whilst change is already needed, I don't think that kind of change will either be popular with the people out there.
So you think they're a bunch of old Blairites?
I think that's an oversimplification, but much of what's being said...
You're the one who's talking about, Blairite policies.
I think the political record of Angela and of Chris Leslie and of Mike speaks for itself. But what I would say to them is the door's always open. I think it's a real mistake that they've made today. And I think
the door is open and more Labour MPs are going to walk out. That's the risk, isn't it?
I think people need to bear in mind the fact that they were elected as Labour candidates in the Labour manifesto. I'll be honest here, I'm under no illusion. In my constituency, most people voted for me, not because I'm Richard Bergen, but because I'm a Labour Party candidate. And what I do think is right is that they actually do the democratic thing. They actually have no mandate to stand or represent their constituents in this new organisation.
Did you go out saying that about Jared O'Mara?
I said it about a number of Labour colleagues. Well, I think he let down his constituents and his party members. And
did you go out calling for him to call a by-election?
Well, I think there should be a by-election.
You're calling for it now, but that's several
I think I will have done. I mean, he did the wrong thing by his constituents. So whoever somebody is, whether they claim to be on the left or whether they have a different view in the Labour Party, it's the wrong thing to do. And when somebody changes political party, I do think they should put it back to their electorate.
You said today that they have possibly weakened the case for a second referendum. Just talk us through that. Are you saying Labour is less likely now to back a second referendum?
What I'm saying
because they will.
What I'm saying is that people out there who are all ears to the idea of the possibility of a second referendum might start to think that because sometimes the message is devalued by the messenger. And I think when we've heard some of the things said today by some of the people...
So Labour is still going to back a second referendum?
Well, it's still an option on the table. And for example, if it were a choice between a second referendum and a no-deal Brexit, then yes, we'd be backing a second referendum as a better alternative to disastrous no-deal Brexit.
So when would that come? When would that time come?
It may come in a very short amount of time, as you know.
On the 27th of February?
It could come very quickly.
OK, well, we'll see. Richard Bergon, thank you very much indeed.
The tourists come here for the Beatles, but in 2010, Luciana Berger came here to be MP. Liverpool Wavertree is about as Labour as it gets. Only now, its MP isn't.
Luciana Berger is your MP, yeah?
Yes, from Wavertree.
What do you think of her?
Exactly the same as everybody else thinks of the other MPs. What did he do for us?
In the Wellington, I met Michael. He follows politics, he's interested and engaged. But ask about the local MP quitting Labour, and his despair is obvious.
It just seems that they're all in the same sort of group, whether they're Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, it doesn't matter. That's the way I feel. Completely and utterly confused.com.
When it comes to the next general election, if you've got Luciana Berger standing as an independent and there's a Labour candidate standing against her, would you vote for either of them?
I think everybody's going to vote for the Labour, because that's what everybody in Liverpool votes for, Labour.
Since 2010, Luciana Berger's majority has been growing, but not everyone in the local Labour parties is keen. There have been attempts to get her out. Lifelong Labour voter and Corbyn fan Tony fears MPs leaving will only help the other side.
We need to stop this austerity. People have had enough of austerity. They've had enough of all the cuts. This should happen with a socialist government. So I think the breakaway is wrong. You can't have a decent debate anymore.
Tony works alongside something of a rarity round these parts because Rob is a Tory voter in Liverpool. And yet these two work harmoniously together. You can't help think the politicians could learn a thing or two.
We need to work together and not just rant and rave at each other and listen to the salient points of the argument. That would do us all a lot more good than just using venom every time you meet somebody who doesn't have the same views as yourself. That's no good.
And that's kind of what Luciana Berger has been on the receiving end of. The level of abuse she's had is appalling.
Yes, and an MP's job cannot be easy, but when she has a cabal of party members clearly attacking her personally, that must be very difficult for her and her family.
Many here say they feel for their MP as a person. But for all those who've quit, the question is whether people will still vote for them.
Well, that's the view from one constituency. So who can this new group or party appeal to? What should it stand for? And will it just do like the SDP did and help open the door to another Conservative government? I'm joined now by Aisha Hazarika, a former advisor to Ed Miliband, who's now a comedian, the Times columnist and former Tony Blair advisor Philip Collins, who's been so keen on a new party that he's written a prospective manifesto for one, and Faiza Shaheen, a Jeremy Corbyn supporter and Labour parliamentary candidate standing against Ian Duncan-Smith. Aisha, do you think this is a group that can appeal to people electorally?
Well, I think they've got to be really clear strategically what their aim is. If their aim is to sort of shake up British politics and create this whole new sort of movement, I think we've got to see a bit more flesh on the bones. What are the actual policies that they're proposing? If their mission is to stop Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister, which is what I think their real mission is, I think they have to be clear about that. I think at the moment it feels like they're kind of being pulled in sort of two directions.
Phil Collins, that is one of the aims, isn't it, to stop Jeremy Corbyn because they disagree with him?
I think it is, and I think they were very clear about it. Chuka Umunna has said absolutely in terms that he's concluded he doesn't think Jeremy Corbyn is fit to be Prime Minister. And if you think that, then you can't vote Labour, let alone be a Labour MP. So it's perfectly noble of him to then stand down and say, I'm not going to stay in this party.
But who is this group it
remains to be seen. Let's imagine the group had entirely the Labour Party policies without the anti-Semitism. That would be better. But what it will do over time, and you can't expect this on the first day, is it will start to develop a policy programme. If it transpires it is a party, which it isn't yet. It's a group of independent MPs in Parliament.
It needs to get to there quite quickly, because in politics, it's not just about who you are individually and you might not like somebody. It's not about your own likes or dislikes. It's about who you seek to serve and what good you're going to do for the greater good, not just you.
Electorally, Faiza, did you see this as a threat?
I don't know what this group is about, apart from being anti-Corbyn, and that's not something they can run on. That it shows how out of touch they are with people's lives who are struggling with money, they are struggling with paying their energy bills. What are they doing on the policies across the board, on housing, on welfare? This is a group of people who have a very bad record in terms of their policy background, in terms of the way they voted on immigration and the way they voted on welfare. And so, I don't see what is inspirational about this group. And when you look at the policies that Labour put forward in the manifesto in 2017, those were so popular. I had members of my family and friends talk to me. The point is that we went from being so far behind to a point where people could say what the Labour policies were on the doorstep. And, part of that as well was the activists that came in.
Look, you cannot expect a group to have a fully formed manifesto on day one. It's just not realistic.
But what do they stand for?
Well, it's not realistic. Well, it'll be very clear what they stand for in due course. But that's not what the day is about. The day is about they are finally saying that they're not prepared to stand as Labour MPs. If, as Mike Gapes said and Luciana Burgess said, you conclude the Labour Party is institutionally racist and anti-Semitic, if that's your view, you can't stay a member of it.
We had someone come on TV and talk about...
Angela Smith did come in and say funny tinge, which didn't quite help that particular argument. But I get the point. I think Pfizer is correct. There was lots of good stuff in the manifesto that a lot of our activists, liked. However, what Labour also stands for is not just policies, it's not just a think tank, it's our values. And anti-discrimination and fighting racism is a big part of that. We're not a party that says, OK, we'll have good trains, but a bit of anti-Semitism on the side is OK. We have to be bigger than that.
I think a lot of people admit that. So you have John McDonnell, you have people coming out that say, look, we've got to do something about anti-Semitism. Of course we do. And, various different things are happening and that will take time, but they need to communicate that well. But can I say what we're not hearing today? It's hundreds of thousands of people like me that joined under Jeremy Corbyn because we finally had a chance to stand for something, stand for real change, no more of this beige politics about personal.
Well, that's fine, because now you will run the Labour Party and the people who don't agree with you will do something else. It's a perfectly reasonable distinction. We just don't agree with you. But unless you've got a plausible way of wrestling back the Labour Party from the institutional anti-Semites at the top, then I cannot see how you stay within it.
But Phil, the other thing to think about is, and I've spoken to a lot of Labour MPs today and over the weekend who feel incredibly torn right now, because for a lot of their constituents, things like poverty, anti-austerity is a big issue for them as well.
Well, will this new grouping stand for that? That's the question, isn't it? Will you look like a bunch of sort of metropolitan elite, nicely suited and booted, Blairite throwbacks?
No, because of course.
Or will you look like a group of people for the masses?
Everybody involved is obviously so conscious that would be a preposterous party to establish. So no, it won't look like that at all. Of course, it'll stand for those sorts of things. It will regard itself as a centre-left party whose primary issues will be precisely those that Aisha.
Look how they're starting off. They're not transparent on where they're getting funding from. Are they answering those questions? So this isn't new politics, is it?
Well, look, to be fair, it is day one.
Can we just work out where this is going next?
But to be fair, you can say where your money's coming from.
Well, let's just work out where this is going next. Tom Watson tonight put out a quite extraordinary video message, saying Labour's really got to change, kind of hinting that he might be. He understands where this is coming from. I mean, do you think there are people like him who are the next lot?
Oh yeah, without doubt. I'm absolutely convinced they are.
Do you know that?
Not that they've decided to go, not that, but that they are contemplating it. They are torn, as Aisha said. They do not know whether they can bring this party back from what they regard as the brink. So yes, they want to stay, the bulk of Labour MPs. Of course they do. But they're not certain that it can be rescued.
If a group of 50 were to leave, how below the waterline is that for the Parliamentary Labour Party?
I think my sense right now is that whilst a lot of people will have questions over certain policies or certain positions, the way that anti-Semitism, Brexit, etc., which has happened over time, any big, broad church has those arguments within. They don't want to leave the Labour Party. And the reason they don't want to leave the Labour Party...
The Labour Party's never had an anti-Semitism argument before. That's just never happened. Under any of its previous leaders, that absolutely did not happen.
Look,
it's not normal politics.
Do you know what? I'm not going to argue against the importance of dealing with racism. I'm never going to argue against that. But let's put that in the context of what other parties aren't doing, what the Labour Party is doing, and how much more...
So nothing to do with any other party.
Literally, we have to
put it in the context of how individual MPs feel. To cross the floor, to leave being a Labour MP, it's not an easy decision, because it's not just you individually, it's you stand on the shoulders of others. There's a lot of tradition, there's a lot of history, and also I've even had a text message from a Conservative today saying, thanks very much guys, you have just gifted us the best thing possible, because this weekend was very difficult for the Tory party, and let's not kid ourselves, this will help reunify the Tory party, and it will help the Tory party.
Phil Collins, you worked for Labour governments for years in 10 Downing Street. How much of an emotional wrench was it for you to leave the Labour Party?
I mean, something of an emotional wrench because you have an affiliation with it, you have an affiliation with people as well as the institution, so it's always difficult to do that. And there are people who've left the Labour Party today who've been members of it for far longer than I have and feel that tribal affiliation much deeper.
I mean, if Winston Churchill worked for all three main parties at different points in time,
but for a lot of MPs,
what's the big deal?
Particularly, I think I've spoken to a lot of female MPs, Labour MPs, that have worked really hard and fought really hard to get elected, and they're so proud to be Labour MPs because of the tradition of fighting for equality and social justice.
When the party changes so much that pride is no longer warranted.
Sure, but for some people,
Phil, I
know for you that point has come.
I know, I'm not saying it should come for you now.
Everyone has their own personal point, and you have to respect that.
I do respect it.
This story about Labour changing so much is this a party that has brought lots of people in, and it has also moved away from the time when it voted through and pushed for things like the Iraq War, when it privatised, when it brought PFIs to our hospitals. So this is a movement which actually moves politics onwards. It gives us an opportunity to really, like I say, really stand for some new policies. And absolutely, we have to do something about various different issues that are within the party. But that's not to say that it doesn't have broad support. It does. I go out door knocking every Saturday. This weekend alone, I had three people tell me they're going to join the party.
It was interesting talking to Chukraman earlier, where he said he was talking about the things that define him. And he did talk about foreign policy. He said he doesn't like Corbyn's foreign policy, so it makes you think, well, what does he like? And he talked about undeliverable promises like nationalisation. If there are people like you who used to work for Tony Blair and people like Chuka talking like that, why is this not just a Blairite tribute act?
Well, Chuka Umunna wasn't even in Parliament during those days, and quite a lot of the people involved had no sympathy with lots of the Blair years. Also, the other thing about the Blair years is their ancient history. Tony Blair's not been Prime Minister for 12 years. It's irrelevant. The things that were relevant then just aren't pertinent now. So it's preposterous to regard it as that. If it looks like that, it will fail. But it won't be that.
The danger for this, the danger for where the Labour Party is, you've sort of got 1970s politics with the Corbyn lot. You've got potentially 1990s politics with this sort of new group. But the one thing is, the one thing that the Labour Party will not win on is, look, I have sympathy, but if the Labour Party is seen as the nasty party, it will not win.
We've got to stop it there. Thank you all very much indeed. Faiza Shaheen, Phil Collins, Aisha Hazarika. Well, this is the biggest split in British politics since the SDP broke away in the early 80s. How significant will it prove to be? Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me again. What more?
A lot of that might come down to just how the leadership manages to respond to the sort of stuff that you've been talking about that Tom Watson has been saying. You sense with Tom Watson, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, that he is trying to, rather in the style of a sort of martial arts, use the strength of this group to somehow change something within the party that he's intending to stay in. But then the great question arises, how long will he and others give that project? How long will they stay doing that? But that's the immediate short-term thing that he's trying to do there. I think you sense some of the tensions that are within this group of seven, even before it potentially expands. When you look into where different MPs, even in that group, have been on different issues, they've been in very different places on issues like tuition fees, defence and things like that. And then when you think if they try and expand that to bring, as they say privately they feel they must, Conservatives in, how on earth do they achieve that? And then we had the issue of timing. There was quite a lot of resistance amongst some people who are in the next circle, as it were, who might just back this project. They really didn't like the fact that it kicked off today. They felt that took attention away from the cause a lot of them believe in, which is a second referendum. Which brings me to one other division, which is an awful lot of the pool in which this group should be fishing, you'd think, for potential support, are people who are actually somewhere else on the Europe debate within the Labour Party. They're actually people with strong Brexit constituencies who actually feel the second referendum is a monstrosity and you shouldn't touch it. So when you think of all those issues, you get a flavour of how this is not a done deal, even in its early, tiny phase.